Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz and I'm joined by my fantastic co-hosts. Up first, he looked at the new card, Lord of Pain, and said, "That collection of TVs is creature type human?" It's Matt Morgan.
So Joey, once upon a time, there was a king that was only 12 inches tall. And he was pretty terrible as a king, but he was a great ruler.
I saw that one coming immediately. I was like, foot joke? No, Matt's above that. This is a metric system situation.
Well, hopefully the joke measured up to your expectations then.
Goodness, speaking of Lord of Pain, Lord of Pun, more like it. All right.
Yeah.
Up next, he looked at the card, the Lord of Pain, and thought that that card would therefore give all of his pains +1/+1, just like all of the other lords do in Magic. It's Dana Roach.
I'm looking forward to the Magic Con we'll be at this coming weekend.
Yeah.
Vegas is always kind of sketchy. I've got a history there. Last time I was there, I wound up gambling away my car. And the people at Enterprise are still furious at me for that. So I guess I'm running from Hertz this time.
Well, that hurts to hear, Dana. Yeah. Oh, goodness. All right. Well, hey, Matt, what are we talking about in this week's episode, dude?
So we're going to take a second to appreciate the finer things in life. And we were playing in person a few weeks back. And I had this thought like, oh, man, this card, it's really good, but it's a little older. It's a card that I kind of compared to Helen Mirren, where they've been around for a while, but they're still they've aged gracefully, and they still make a huge impact whenever you see them. So we're going to talk about a lot of cards that are Helen Mirren cards, if you will.
Yeah, I love this idea for a topic. I'm really excited to get into this one, but we've got some shout outs to do before we get to it.
We are very excited to be members of Team Ultimate Guard. Simply put, we use their products from their sleeves to their boxes to their bags, and that makes for a very easy partnership. This Saturday, if you happen to be at MagicCon Las Vegas from 10:30 to noon, we'll be at the Ultimate Guard booth. So stop in and say hello, and you might even get a chance to play some games with us.
Heck yeah. And of course, we will be playing with cards that are lovingly embraced in Ultimate Guard sleeves. I think that's how Dana has said it in the past.
Safely ensconced, I think is what I've used before as well.
Safely ensconced. Heck yeah. And also in Vegas, you may even see me on the Mana stage at 12:30 on Sunday, by the way. But if you see us, just come say hi and let's get a game in.
Yeah, and if you do happen to run into us and you feel so behooved to support us, you can do so in a lot of different ways. You can like this video, you can subscribe on YouTube, you can subscribe to your local podcast app and leave reviews over there too. Just great free ways to support the show, and we appreciate all of that support. But if you are so blown away by our skills and personality in person at MagicCon Las Vegas, you can go to patreon.com/EDHRECast, where we have patron tiers of all sorts of levels, where they want to join our Discord community. You want to see all these episodes a day early. You can see this episode before MagicCon Las Vegas comes out, and you get to brag to all your friends about that. You can do all that over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, and there's even a tier where you get the weekly coveted patron shout out. So this week, Kevin Saka, thank you so much. I see you really Saka'd it to us by hitting that subscribe button over at patreon.com, and we appreciate that support so much.
It's actually Kevin Sakashima, so we got to watch out for Sakashima the imposter over here in our Patreon.
Kevin's no imposter. Kevin's the real OG.
Indeed. Okay, you guys, let's get into our main topic. Matt, as you called them, we're talking about Helen Mirren cards that are a little bit older in the game's history, but they're kind of underrated. Hopefully they're not forgotten because they're still just classics. And a thing that you said when you were describing this show topic idea was that they've stood the test of time even as the game has changed. And I think that's a really great, like, sort of centering place to start when we are figuring out which cards we're going to discuss, you know?
Yeah, like Helen Mirren or Hugh Jackman, if you please. Just those cards that they've been doing this for so long that they kind of get taken for granted, I think is a really good way to put it. And the card that really tipped this off, because like I said, we were playing in person and I had a Forgotten Ancient out in play. And I think that thing probably got like 9 or 10 counters per turn cycle. And it blew me away that this card is as old as it is, but it still just does a lot of work, and it's moving counters around. It's doing everything that I wanted in a deck, and it just filled its role perfectly. And so it just kind of got me thinking about what are other older cards that we still think are just great, that we love seeing in wherever they happen to pop up. And this Forgotten Ancient definitely is the card that sparked this all for me.
And one of the balances we're trying to strike here with this is, like, obviously there's a lot of old great cards that are probably more staples. We're avoiding staples here because, Swords to Plowshares or Rhystic Study or Animate Dead are obviously older cards, but they're crazy popular as well. And on the other hand, we're also like not trying to do a challenge stats thing here where we're mentioning something with 500 decks. Right. We're just mostly looking at cards that do see play, that aren't staples, but they still have somehow managed to be good in the average deck.
Yeah. It's important for us to draw a line here that we're talking about Helen Mirren cards, or I might call them Carla Gugino cards. Just a stunning diva. I can totally appreciate that, but we're trying not to talk about the Robert Downey Jr. cards.
So we're not trying to talk about Jake Gyllenhaal, where it's smothering tithe type of cards. That it's just handsome, it's young, it does everything very well.
They're kind of Mitch Hedberg cards. They're cards we used to play. We still play, but we used to play them too.
And this is also distinct from what I would even call a Scarlett Johansson card. Cards that show up in more roles than are probably correct for them. So stuff like Brainstorm would be an example there. We're probably not going to talk about those types of cards.
We've gone so off the rails with all these metaphors. And
people are yelling at us in their car right now.
I think all these metaphors is kind of like Nicolas Cage, where like it's weird. It's kind of dubious of quality. Maybe we should just move on and get into like the real meat of the episode.
Oh, you don't want to talk about weird cards that you build a whole deck around, even if it's a little bit odd? Nicolas Cage cards? We could do a whole plot twist on this episode topic if you wanted, Matt.
I mean, we probably could. I mean, I have a couple cards here on my list that we're going to talk about today that you're going to be kind of surprised to hear me saying this. They're kind of Idris Elba cards. It's cards like I don't normally build that way, but I get it.
All right, sort of like me with the Carla Gugino. All right, perfect.
There we go. Yes.
We probably should actually get back to the main topic, though. You're right, Matt. I've completely derailed us. I apologize. Where should we start? Where we're talking about these classics that have stood the test of time, even as the game has changed a little bit around them.
Well, I guess I'll build off of my Forgotten Ancient and throw another card that's in the same deck. And Corpse Jack Menace, under 50,000 decks. I have a +1/+1 counters deck. It's my Ukeeman Kazir deck. And both of these cards, I was kind of surprised just to see how many people were cutting these. These cards still do absolutely heavy lifting in the right deck. And I couldn't believe that we've kind of moved on from these cards, and it blows my mind.
Forgotten Ancient especially is one that like we get so many +1 counter cards these days. Like multiple times a year there'll be a set where that's a relatively major theme or sub-theme. It's just very easy if you're playing that particular kind of deck to like find some new cool thing for it. Except Forgotten Ancient somehow still manages to be one of those cards that like even if you have that deck, you're like, it performs so well. It's like so unexciting, but it just gets the job done and manages to hold down a slot. And if you have access to black as well as green in that deck, the same thing's true of Corpse Jack Menace. Like they're just always performers.
Frankly, the whole genre of whenever opponents cast spells, I'll get +1 counters, Mana Gorger Hydra, Sunscorch Regent.
Yeah.
I feel like Sunscorch Regent especially can be kind of underrated in that way. But like when you actually see it in a game, you're like, dang it, what do I, oh, crap, what do I do? That thing got crazy powerful, crazy fast.
One that jumps out at me here is from way back, and this sounds crazy to talk about a card from Fallen Empires being good. It's one of Magic's notoriously weaker sets in history. But like the card Goblin War Drums still is really good. It's 2 and a red for an enchantment, and each attacking creature you control has menace. That's it. But for 2 and a red on an enchantment, it's not getting you 2 for 1. It is letting you poke through creature damage. There's just a lot of decks where that's a really useful card that nothing else quite does what it does. It's only in 17,000 decks. It's 20 some years old. That's a card that's like not a staple, but it's really, I think, solidly held the test of time, particularly for being from that set.
I remember you guys did an episode about keywords in Magic, and Menace was definitely lauded in that episode as one of the more underrated mechanics out there. Yeah. Menace cuts your opponent's blockers in half. Like that's great. That's brilliant. I have a zombie deck. I have Will Helt, and in that deck I have Lord of the Accursed, which can give all of your zombies menace. That thing's a win condition in that deck. That suddenly takes my opponents like from, oh, I think I'm safe to, oh, no, I am dead. So Dana, I'm with you. This is the kind of card that is easy to overlook, but when you cast it, that thing is changing the game, which is exactly what a stunning diva should do in a movie.
Absolutely.
Speaking of, I think I'll do one of mine now. Guys, Reigns of Power. Reigns of Power
Oh, yeah.
is a great card. It was the first one that I thought of when, Matt, you proposed this topic idea. The 4-mana blue instant, untap all creatures you control and all creatures target opponent controls. You and that opponent each gain control of all creatures the other controls until end of turn. Those creatures gain haste until end of turn. So you can swap your creatures with someone else's. And if you have no creatures, but they have a bunch of creatures, suddenly you win the game. You can use this mid-combat to stop people from being able to attack you successfully. You can borrow someone else's blockers to screw over their board. I've even seen this stop someone doing a creature combo thing that just hit to like give the board time to help answer that and pick things apart. It's a really fantastic card, originally from Stronghold in like 2009, currently showing up in 22,000 decks, and it sees the occasional reprint in Commander-focused sets as well. And I think that just points to how well this card has aged gracefully. This is the kind of card that in one-on-one Magic was a little bit weird, but in multiplayer Magic, it's just expanded into fantastic, just wonderful new horizons. And anytime that I see this card, it is used in a brilliant and sometimes even game-winning way.
Well, and I'm going to see your Reigns of Power, because I absolutely love that card, and I'm going to raise you one, too, with Illusionist Gambit.
Oh, sure.
Similar type of card. It's 2 blue for an instant, cast it only during declare blocker step on an opponent's turn. So when on somebody else's combat step, you remove all attacking creatures from combat and untap them. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, and then effectively all your opponent's creatures are goated. It is such a wild, like all these fog types of effects, like you mentioned, Joey, you're able to cast both these spells in response to an all-out attack on you, probably going to be lethal. Not so much. Like it's the call an ambulance, but not for me.
But not for me. Yeah.
And then also all of a sudden, yeah, you just get to, I see what you tried to do there in that combat step, but try again, please. That is the best way to describe these two cards. They're older. They've been around for forever, not getting a lot of love. Like Illusionist Gambit is under 17,000 decks right now. That is so few decks for such a powerful card. And it's again, we like fogs on this show, and we're just going to talk about 2 potentially game-breaking fogs.
Well, you know, a similar card I will throw in the mix with both the 2 you guys just mentioned is Sudden Spoiling.
Yeah.
Oh, heck yeah.
Sudden Spoiling back from Time Spiral in 2006. It's in 43,000 decks, so it's, you know, it sees play, but some of that is because it's been in a couple precons over the years. But yeah, 2 black and a colorless for an instant with split second, and creatures target player controls become 0/2 and lose all abilities. So, you know, assuming they're not playing with a bunch of auras or equipment or counters or something, it's a fog really often. It's a way that, you know, say you're playing a bunch of flyers and your opponent is too, you can knock down their flyers with it, so you can swing through for lethal. You can really mess with somebody who thinks they have a good blocking situation set up. You can swing in, and once they declare their blocks, thinking they're going to kill your creatures, you do turn the tables by making their creatures 0/2s. It's just one of those cards that can do a dozen different things in a game, similar to Illusionist Gambit, similar to Reigns of Power. These cards have been good for a long time, and while they're not like flashy or powerhouses, they're just still really good in a whole bunch of decks.
That split second on the Sudden Spoiling too.
Yeah.
Is, you know, everyone's got their plans ready and they're like, oh, in response, oh, never mind.
Yep.
The split second making it so that they cannot respond is so terrific. And yeah, the genre of fogs is especially one that has just aged like fine wine in terms of the transition from one-on-one formats where these cards were originally printed in the kind of game that they were designed for compared to the multiplayer experience. You time a moment's piece correctly, just a fog, even with flashback, like that can time walk a player if you time your fogs right. And a bunch of those like darkness and stuff like that, they've really seen brand new life in the Commander format. And they've just gotten better over time. It's, yeah, what a fantastic group of picks. You're right, Matt. We love them so much, and it's for good reason.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we want to talk about fogs that time walk people, Tangle is another just fantastic fog.
Sure.
Less than 5,000 decks, but, you know, you get attacked, you fog everything, then you make sure that they don't have blockers for the next turn, so they can't attack you next turn. That's 2 fogs in 1 for a single player. Just those types of effects are just so good. And that's not even counting all of the very commonly played fog effects that we like to play, like Arachnogenesis, like all of those that just make the army, Galadrim Ambush. There's a lot of really good fogs out there, folks, and we're just touching the tip of the iceberg.
Well, real quick, we can't talk about Galadrim. That's too new, so it doesn't count as a Helen Mirren. That's more of a Timothée Chalamet card.
I said like Galadrim Ambush. I didn't say we're talking about it.
All right, fair enough, Matt. As long as we're talking about cards that have effects that mess with combat, I think I'll move to another one of mine here, and it's a favorite that we've named a handful of times over the years, including probably on Challenge the Stats ages and ages ago. But Dthy Embrace is a particular favorite enchantment of mine. That is the 3-mana black enchantment that for 2 black mana as an activated ability, you can give target creature shadow until end of turn. And a creature with shadow can block or be blocked only by creatures with shadow. So sort of a different dimension of combat, a little bit like flying in that way, but a new type of evasion. This card shows up currently in 7,500 decks, and I love using this. I have this in my Virtus and Gorm deck, for instance. This card came out in Tempest in 1997, but it's just gotten way, way cooler over time, in my opinion, as we've gotten more of these cool creatures that have amazing when I deal damage to an opponent effects. But the thing that I especially love about this one is the dynamic that it introduces in a multiplayer format where you can talk with other players to give their creatures evasion so that you can help a mutual ally help deal with a mutual opponent. I think that this is such a great, clever piece. And when you play it, it's just so neat. I just really like this one. I feel like I gotta mention it here.
Another thing to note on it too is you could conceivably give a blocker shadow and make it unable to block, and that is useful sometimes in a situation where something comes up and like, oh, I don't want that thing blocking because they're gonna, you know, maybe it has a way to draw a bunch of cards when it blocks something, or
Brash Taunter, it would deal damage.
Absolutely. Or it's something that can block a whole bunch of creatures, and like, well, I could give my one thing shadow and poke it through, or I could give the blocker that can block multiple things shadow and get multiple things through. Like there's a lot of different configurations for this card, and that always makes these kind of things really effective.
It's such a cool piece of tech in any deck it shows up, and I love it.
Yeah, there's all sorts of cards that it's very easy to shoehorn as being strictly offensive or strictly defensive. And Dthy Embrace is one of those that's like, well, we do a little bit of both here. We play offense, we play defense. Kind of like Fogs or kind of like Berserk. You think of it as a way to buff up your own creature just to go in for an Alpha Strike, forgetting you can cast Berserk as a removal spell as well because you want to buff something up for somebody else and then also get rid of that creature when it's done. There's all sorts of cards that I love how they kind of pull double duty, and Dthy Embrace absolutely is one because, again, it's not just your creature. So say Dana's attacking Joey, I can use Dthy Embrace to give Joey's blockers shadow, and just, it's a political tool. There's so much fun play behind. I think there's a whole category of cards here that we could talk about, but we don't have time. We have a mission here today.
It's true. It's true. Although I just have to point out that why is it, Matt, in every hypothetical, like, oh, someone's attacking another player, the attackee is always Joey? Why does that always seem to be the case?
Joey,
I
don't know if you remember, but when we streamed over at twitch.tv/EDHRECast, you had to die first every single game. Otherwise, you just won. And that still, stays true in 2024. Joey, I love you, bud, but you have to die first.
I understand. Attack me while you can. It's a strong move. It's a strong move.
Well, talking about removal pieces here, one that I think has stood the test of time, Shattering Spree, printed back in 2006 in Guild Pack. It's in 11,000 decks, so it does see some play, but it's 1 mana for a sorcery, destroy target artifact, but it has Replicate for a red. So particularly in a mono red deck, I mean, Vandal Blast sees a ton of play, but like, there's no reason to not also run this in particularly if you're in mono red, 1 mana destroy an artifact, 2 mana to destroy 2, 3 to destroy 3, like, you can get a pretty good rate out of this. It's pretty easy to spend just red mana in mono red. And what's nice about Replicate is you would have to individually counter each instance of the spell. So, you can afford to be a little bit greedy here, and you can target the scary thing the blue player has and still blow up multiple other things, because if the blue player defends themselves with counter magic, you're still blowing up the other things.
Yeah, it feels like a more surgical version of Vandal Blast, and being delicate with your own mana is great. But the thing I especially want to point out about this, Replicate copies the card, and we've gotten a whole bunch of Magecraft cards from Strixhaven that are very, very popular. Archmage Emeritus, for example, drawing you a card whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery.
Oh yeah,
combining Replicate cards with that effect is nutty.
And it's a card that was kind of expensive for a few years, but it's got enough reprints lately that you can get it relatively cheaply too. Price has really gone down on it. I think it's around $1 nowadays. So yeah, it's one of those cards that has always been pretty good, and it's still pretty good. There's still very easy for me to find room for this in decks.
Yeah, I think the big knock that players have against Shattering Spree is, like you said, it is a sorcery.
Yep.
And that discourages people from playing so many cards. I have one that also kind of fills that same role with Morbid Curiosity. I love this card in so many of my decks, and it's only played in 9,000 decks right now. And it came out in Aether Revolt. It's an older card at this point, which hurts my bones to say Aether Revolt came out a while ago.
Don't say it's an older card. That's not fair. That's not fair, Matt. It's only 2015, 2016.
It hurts me more than it hurts you, Joey.
I don't. That can't be.
You still have your youth.
That can't be 8 or 9 years ago. That's not. Wow. Okay. Wow. I feel like Dana. Anyway, keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. So Morbid Curiosity, 1 black for a sorcery, which discourages so many players, I think. But as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact or a creature, and then you draw cards equal to the converted mana cost of the sacrificed permanent. So everybody loves Village Rites types of cards. You lose a little bit of flexibility not being instant speed, so you can cast it in response to somebody targeting your stuff. But if you have big things out there on the battlefield anyways, Morbid Curiosity is such a powerhouse way to draw cards. I love this card so much. I played my Victus Asmati deck, which is all about cheating big things into play, then getting rid of them for value. I love this, and it hurts my heart to see not very many people playing this. And it's had a lot of time to kind of catch on to.
Yeah, this is one that I've seen you combine with Ugin's Nexus as the artifact you sacrifice to not only draw cards, but get an extra turn.
That's my secret tech, Joey. That's my secret tech. You cannot tell people about my secret tech.
You've told people on this very show, like years ago.
I know. It's besides the point.
Okay. I follow. As long as you're talking about cards that let you sacrifice stuff, I'll move to... I'll do these simultaneously. These are 2 entries that are both sacrifice outlets that I love to bits. We know that sacrifice outlets are really, really good. Viscera Seer is one of the most popular black creatures in the entire format. Like having the ability to for free sacrifice stuff, it's terrific. And the big names in that category definitely take up a lot of the air in the room. The Viscera Seer, the Ashnods and Phyrexian Altars. Those are, of course, wildly powerful. But 2 that I also want to shout out are Spawning Pit and Fanatical Devotion. Spawning Pit is a 2-mana artifact that lets you sacrifice a creature to get a counter on it, and you can remove some of those counters to make little tokens, little 2/2 artifact tokens. And Fanatical Devotion is a 3-mana white enchantment that sacrifices a creature to let you regenerate a target creature. These are just so good. One of them came out in Nemesis in the year 2000. The other one came out in Darksteel in 2004. They're showing up in about 18,000 to 21 or 22,000 decks. They're seeing a modest amount of play there. That's pretty decent, but it is just a testament to how good sacrifice outlets can be. And I think these ones are a little underrated, but when they're in play, dang, is it fantastic. They don't need to be doing the stuff that Phyrexian Altar is doing. Those are already the most popular movies on the scene, but these cards are fantastic role players in a way that maybe other folks, as you said earlier, Matt, kind of take for granted because the other stuff is taking up the air in the room, but these are really, really terrific when you have them because that's just how good sacrifice outlets are.
Yeah, just a lot of these cards, I think you could say when they're in their element, and to keep the analogy of Helen Mirren, they just command everybody's, like their presence kind of takes over, and it makes such a huge influence on what else is going on. So many of these cards, you can't forget about them on the battlefield. Like the Dthy Embrace, you cannot forget that somebody has a way to make things unblockable or remove things that can't block. There's so much going on there with so many of these cards. And I'm just glad that I got you both to agree that we're going to do this type of show because there's a bunch of cards I love and I think fit this role so well.
Yeah, the big debate was just, do we call it a Helen Mirren card? Do we call it a Meryl Streep card? Do we call it like that? That was the real challenge. And speaking of challenge, guys, do you think it's time for Challenge the Stats?
I think it's a great time, yeah.
Absolutely. Let's go into it.
Yeah, there's a lot of data on EDHREC that we don't always agree with, so let's take a quick moment to take a critical look at that, and then we'll be back with our main topic right after.
Yeah, let's do it. The listener challenge this week is submitted by listener Daniel Warmkey, and it's for Zimone All Questioning decks. Zimone All Questioning is a 1/1 for 3 mana. At the beginning of your end step, if a land entered the battlefield under your control this turn, and you control a prime number of lands, create Primo the Indivisible, a legendary 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, then put that many +1 counters on it. And Daniel says, I think people are missing a major category of cards that can be used to keep her mathematical fur buddy in play. Only 7% of Zimone decks are running Kenrith's Transformation, which would be reasonable if it was just being used for removal, but that's not necessarily the best way to use it in this deck. It doesn't specify opponent's creature, which means that you can use it on Primo, effectively giving it +3/+3, and drawing you a card for just 2 mana. Yeah, I think that's a really solid way to look at it. I think it's a really good card just in general, but the fact that you can run it in this deck as a removal piece, but if you don't need to use it as a removal piece, you can use it to buff up your creature that Zimone makes and also draw a card in the process. The flexibility of that is really nice. I like that call, and it definitely should be in more than 7% of Zimone all questioning decks.
All right, nice one. I like that. And as long as we're talking about Duskmourn commanders, I'll move to my challenge now, because I also have a challenge for a Duskmourn commander. So I've been tinkering with graveyard stuff, as I do, with some of the new Duskmourn cards, and I've officially committed to upgrading the Winter Cynical Opportunist precon. That is the Golgari version of Winter. It's a 4-mana 2/5 with Death Touch that mills 3 cards when it attacks, and it has this Delirium ability. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile any number of cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. If you do, you put a permanent card from among them onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it. I really like this. I get to reanimate a bunch of stuff all in a brand new way. When I first read Winter, I was a little bit dubious, and it seems like a lot of people are actually kind of dubious. This is actually the second to last place among the precon commanders overall. It's not being built nearly as much compared to all the other precon commanders, and it's actually the 15th place overall commander from the full Duskmourn set. And I think everyone kind of looks at that finality counter that Winter produces on the thing you reanimate and kind of bristles at that, because you know, if it goes away, it would get exiled. And we already have stuff like Mirren doing Golgari Reanimator so well, so by comparison, Winter might feel like a little bit of a letdown. But the thing that Winter can do is reanimate big enchantments and artifacts. Like, Matt, you'll appreciate this. Something that I've been reanimating with Winter is stuff like the World Spell or Wondrous Crucible to keep putting more free stuff into play. Like, those are terrific. And if someone does destroy them and they go away, that's cool. I've got a big graveyard full of other stuff that I can also reanimate. And I really, really like that. This is a tricky deck to balance. You need to be very careful of your card types. You would need a lot of permanents. A lot of your permanents are also going to have multiple types to help satisfy the Delirium a little bit more easily. And that means that your instants and sorceries are a thing of particular scrutiny. A lot of the sorceries that you play will be stuff like Mulch to help you fill the graveyard. And that means I think that you actually have the most flexibility to mess around with the instants in a Winter deck. And that's why I want to talk about the card You Look Upon the Tarrasque. You Look Upon the Tarrasque is a 5-mana instant from the Baldur's Gate set that has you choose one of the following 2 modes. You either Run and Hide, which prevents all combat damage that we dealt to you and creatures you control this turn, a kind of one-sided fog-ish effect. Or, the important part for Winter here, you Gather Your Courage, and that says target creature gets +5/+5 and gains indestructible until end of turn. All creatures your opponents control that are able to block that creature this turn must do so. Winter has Death Touch. So the thing that I've enjoyed using with this card here is giving Winter +5/+5 indestructible and then attacking someone, and they have to block all of those creatures. And Winter with the Death Touch, now having 7 power, you can apply 1 damage to that creature, 1 damage to that creature, 1 damage, and just like clear out their board while also allowing every other creature that you attack with to get through to attack the player completely. This card doesn't even show up on Winter Cynical Opportunist's EDHREC page at all. It's that underplayed right now in Winter. I've had terrific success with this card specifically because of the Death Touch that is happening. It can open up a lethal attack, or it can just kind of be a one-sided board wipe for any of your opponent's available blockers. This is a fantastic card, and it's an instant, which I think is the place you have the most flexibility with the card types in that particular deck. I promise, give this one a shot. You'll be really happy you did.
All right, well, I'll wrap us up then with a card that I got to see at tables, and I was kind of dubious because it's been around for a little bit, but it hasn't really gotten a lot of love. But it did a ton of work in a Rakdos the Muscle deck, so I got to give it some love here. So Orca Siege Demon is back from Dominaria United. It's 5 red and a black, and it's a 5/5 with trample. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Orca Siege Demon. When it dies, it deals damage equal to its power divided as you choose among any number of targets. There's just all sorts of strategies out there that you can do in Rakdos where you're sacrificing a lot of permanents. And if you are in a Rakdos the Muscle deck where you're sacrificing a lot of creatures for card advantage, Orca Siege Demon is able to get extremely big, extremely fast with that ability where whenever another creature dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So, and doesn't just count your creatures. If there's other creatures out there too on the other side of the battlefield, say you're playing a Mayhem Devil, picking everything off, it's just an easy way to get very, very big, very, very quickly. And with Rakdos the Muscle, whenever you sacrifice another creature, you get to exile 7 cards off of Orca Siege Demon. This is just such a powerful, powerful effect, in addition to getting that death trigger. Now, again, 7 mana is a lot, but don't tell me that Rakdos decks struggle to reanimate big creatures like that, Joey. I know that you're picking up what I'm laying down here. So if you need a just big mana haymaker for your Rakdos the Muscle, or just any Rakdos sacrifice type of deck, Orca Siege Demon is a great card to fit in the 99 as just a big mana powerhouse to fill that really kind of specific role. Only 4,400 decks total are playing Orca Siege Demon, and that's not even counting the 178 with Orca at the helm. So if you need a good underrated card to fill a slot, definitely give Orca Siege Demon a try. Ben McCready wrote an article over at EDHREC kind of exploring Orca a little bit too, so definitely check that article out as well too.
So to get back into some of these Helen Mirren cards, I've got 2 here I want to talk about. One from Tempest in 97 and one from Urza's Destiny in 99. And there are 2 cards that are kind of thematically similar. That's Insight and Compost. Insight is 2 and a blue. It's an enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a green spell, draw a card. And Compost is 1 and a green. That's an enchantment. Whenever a black card is put into an opponent's graveyard, you may draw a card. So they're just like draw engines that sit there repeatedly drawing you cards in blue and in green. You know, occasionally you're going to find a situation where no one's playing black or no one's playing green, but like, I don't know if I've ever run into that running both of these cards. They're pretty efficient. Are they a Ristic Study? No. Are they way less annoying to have in play? Do they draw you way less heat? Absolutely. And these are 2 cards for being as old as they are. I mean, I'm not putting them in every deck, but they're still really solid. I run both of them and never regret seeing them pop up.
Shout out to Josh Murphy, who has played some of these cards to great effect against us in a couple of games. And also, like, shout out to some of our past episodes going over, like, format data, especially, like, color breakdowns. About 40% of decks out there are 2-color, and about 31% of decks that people are playing are 3-color. Only 17% of decks are monocolor. So your odds are really good to find the right opponent with the right color on that front, just playing the odds, but especially so because the most popular 2-color combinations are Dimir, Golgari, and Simic. And then 4 out of the top 5 most popular 3-color combinations include black, which also happens to be the most popular version of monocolor decks out there. Yeah. And let it also be noticed here that when we've done videos about decks with big color imbalances, decks that include green often contain significantly more green cards than cards of the other colors in their deck, often because of, you know, ramp spells helping to make the entire strategy get the color fixing that it needs to take off. So suffice it to say, these cards, Reap and Compost and all them, it is very, very rare for you to encounter a game where neither of those colors are present, or even where just one of those colors isn't present. It's pretty common for you to be able to run into one of those and get some pretty consistent triggers. And if there are multiple people who are playing a green deck, for instance, the number of cards you draw is insane.
It just goes up and up. And Reap is a card that Gavin Verhey came on the show several years ago at this point and shouted out as very specifically as, this card is really, really good, folks. You should check it out. And it saw a little bump, and then he went on Command Zone and talked about it again, saw a little bump, but then it trailed off. I think folks should probably pay attention to Gavin Verhey when he says a card is good. He's a very smart person. He's helping shape the future of Commander now that Wizards of the Coast is taking over the format. Reap is super good, folks. If you didn't listen to it years ago, listen to us now.
Yeah, that's a 2-mana green instant. Return any number of target cards from your graveyard to your hand. You cannot choose more cards than the number of black permanents target opponent controls. So, short version of this, if you're playing against me, this card will draw your entire graveyard back into your hand.
Yes.
As long as you're talking about cards that care about opponents' colors, I'll also really quick mention Red Elemental Blast. This is probably too popular to be a proper Dame Helen Mirren card. It's showing up in 151,000 decks, 7% of decks that are eligible to play it. But just, yeah, the ability to, for 1 red mana, counter a blue spell or destroy a blue permanent that kills a lot of commanders. It counters Cyclonic Rifts. It counters blue counter spells. And that just feels really, really good. Stuff that cares about the specific colors your opponents are playing, that was probably harder to gauge in a one-on-one format. You know, it's much more of a gamble there, whereas in multiplayer formats, that's again something that expands and kind of has a new life to it. But yeah, it shows up in 7% of decks that are eligible to play it. I think it's kind of at staple status in CEDH decks, so it's less of a Helen Mirren and more of a Viola Davis, more of a Kate Blanchett or a Pedro Pascal type of situation. So it doesn't quite fit the category here, but I just wanted to mention it because it goes to show you how powerful some of these cards that care about enemy colors truly can be.
Well, to go back into the maybe a little more obscure Helen Mirren-esque ones, and since I just mentioned a couple draw spells, I'll throw one more out there. A Rush of Knowledge from back in Scourge in 2003. Just over 10,000 decks. And it's also a sorcery, which, isn't ideal, but 4 and a blue, draw cards equal to the highest converted mana cost among permanents you control. So yes, technically someone could remove the highest converted mana cost among permanents you control in response, but it doesn't target. It would scale down to the next thing in the list. So it's less risky than some of these things sometimes are. It's pretty easy to have your worst case scenario be draw 3. And a lot of times this is a pretty easy draw 4, draw 5. And in the right deck, it's a pretty easy draw 10, draw 11 sometimes if you're looking at an Ur-Dragon list or something. 10,000 decks for a card that's inexpensive to purchase and has a pretty good upside. I like Rush of Knowledge. It's been good for years, and it will be good years from now, I would wager.
Yeah, where are my Yannette players out there? I've been using it in that deck for a long time now, because the deck is oops, all 9 drops. So Rush of Knowledge is pretty consistently drawing you 9. Yep. And even if they get rid of the 9 drop, Yannette's usually still there, so you still draw 5. And you can do it for free, because she can cheat it off the top of your deck. It's great.
Yeah, I just built a Coma Cosmos Serpent deck, and this absolutely has found a way into that deck. Everything is just big in that. I'm making copies of Coma. I'm making more copies of Coma that just aren't legendary. I absolutely love this card. It's one that I'm very, very excited to get to cast finally.
Coma, man. Matt, you're kind of turning to the dark side a little bit with all of your super stompy stuff. That's Coma's whoa.
I've been on the super stompy thing pretty much since I started playing Magic. I don't know if you know me, but my first deck was Mael the Anima.
I know you've been on the stompy
in different colors.
I know you've been on the Stompy. I just mean you're turning to the dark side of Stompy because Coma's such a whoa card.
Coma is very whoa, and or I guess as our friends at One More Mana would say, a bruh card.
yeah. Coma's like the James Earl Jones. You're going full Darth Vader. That's.
Oh, absolutely. I guess the next card that I want to talk about that I have cast several times over, and it's not so much a Helen Mirren card. It isn't terribly old. It came out in Conspiracy 2, but I want to say it's the Jack Black of Magic cards where it's a little gray, but it still puts on a really good show, is Sylvanas Stampede. It's 4 green for a sorcery. Starting with you, every player votes for wild or free, and then you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. For every wild vote, you put that creature on the battlefield, and then for every free vote, you get to put a permanent from your hand onto the battlefield. This card, I love. Every time I get to resolve this, it's got very much a Last March of the Ents or Rishkar's Expertise type of feel to it because there's so much value that's going on, and just somehow people kind of got very excited about that card, but then it moved on pretty quickly. And Jack Black he's had some staying power, but I definitely think that Sylvanas Stampede has that staying power too, with just how many cards you're able to just crank out and put on the battlefield.
Well, it's one of those cards too where so often whatever choice you make is the wrong one.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which is always fantastic to cast, where your opponent's going to mess that up somehow. It's just almost impossible not to get a ton of value off that card.
By the way, Matt, in your comparisons there, you had mentioned Last March of the Ents. I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to tell a very important story about a recent event with Last March of the Ents that occurred.
Oh, you mean how we sat at the turntables and they definitely turned, where you got to cast a Last March of the Ents, and I was the one who got to cast Narset's Reversal, and then I didn't do a whole lot with it, but it still felt so good. We'll make sure to put a picture up on the screen for everybody out there, because the moment was perfect.
Yeah, it was such a full circle moment for you, because the first several times you've been trying to cast that spell, it got Narset's Reversaled, and it was fantastic for you to be able to finally be on the other end of that. I was really, really proud of you, but also really disappointed in my turn.
The amount of glee in Matt's face as he was telling that story right after it happened, fantastic.
It was so perfect. Well, and I remember everybody at MagicCon Chicago probably heard me screaming with joy the first time I got Last March of the Ents to actually resolve too. So getting to be on both sides of the table finally, years later, it just fills my heart with joy.
Yeah, but I will say, I still won that game, and I'm proud of myself too.
Still win that game.
Well, speaking of green spells that draw you a ton of cards and create a ton of advantage, how good is Shamanic Revelation that the worst version, Collective Unconscious, is still a really good card.
Yeah.
Like, if you have to choose between the two of them, Shamanic Revelation costing 1 less and having Ferocious makes it a better spell. But I have a couple different decks that are running them both, and I never feel bad about seeing the worst version. 6 mana to draw a card for each creature you control in the right deck is still tremendous, even if it isn't Shamanic Rev. And, you know, the card's just in 11,000 decks.
Is it really?
For a card printed in 1999 in Mercadian Masks, that's still a pretty solid card, and I don't feel bad about seeing it in the decks where I'm running in.
That's more popular than I expected. Although that whole genre of it, I mean, Camaraderie also exists. That's a Selesnya version that gives you a little bit of extra life, gives you some +1, but also still has that draw effect, and the draw effect is the most important component. And as Matt will tell us all, green go wide. You can get a lot of bodies in play, so it isn't uncommon for you to draw dozens of cards off of this. Dana, it kind of reminds me of an old Challenge the Stats pick of yours, which was Minions Murmurs. That effect in black for 4 mana, but you lose life for each creature you control. But like, that's still really, really good, because look how much we can swell a board with bodies really easily in the Commander format.
Now, this is the kind of effect they've gone back to this well a few times, and I could see in 3 or 4 years where we've gotten enough, you know, Shamanic Revelation-esque variants on it where this might get bumped out of the rotation.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet. I still feel like in a deck, a green deck making a bunch of bodies, still really, really solid and worth running.
I think that's very fair. You're talking about a 6 mana sorcery. I'll talk about a 6 mana sorcery here too. This one's possibly a little bit more on the underrated side, because I think it's got a big brother that is taking up all of the spotlight. My favorite card in the game is Living Death. We all know this. I love my Necromancy. I have Living Death in probably 5, 6... too many decks, probably too many decks. But the ability to revive all dead creatures, put them right back into play, is unquestionably powerful. I win a lot of games that way. But there's another version of that type of effect that I think is also very good, and that's the card Twilights Call. Twilights Call first saw print in the Invasion set back in the year 2000. It's currently in about 4,700 decks compared to Living Death's 129,000. This is a 6 mana sorcery, but you can actually cast it for 8 mana if you want to give it flash, basically. And it doesn't have the sacrifice ability that destroys creatures and such that Living Death does. It just says each player returns all creature cards from their graveyard to the battlefield. And that is, admittedly, less exciting than Living Death. Of course it is. But if you're playing your graveyards right, it's still really good. I don't know, if you're doing graveyard stuff, you can already keep your opponent's graveyards probably kind of empty, or fill up yours so much that even if they get a little bit of value, the amount of value that you get is so overwhelming it doesn't necessarily matter. In times where I've played Living Death, Twilight's Call would also win me some of those same games, so I want to shout out that one here too. It is a fantastic sorcery and very, very deadly when you play it.
And so a card that I think, Joey, actually you probably can appreciate quite a bit here too, is Evolutionary Leap. This is a card that it feels like it hasn't been out for that long, but it came back in Magic Origins, I want to say. Pay a green and sacrifice a creature to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. You put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And this is just one of those ultimate, Joey, you like to talk a lot about how I like onboard tricks. You know that I have the sack outlet on the battlefield. You can target whatever you want, but I'm going to get value out of it. And this is such a powerful, powerful way to discourage board wipes, because I'm just going to restock my hand anyways. And this has been around for so long, but it's in less than 35,000 decks at the moment. And that just seems super, super low. Now, there's a lot of synergies with like Yasova Dragonclaw. You can steal people's stuff and sacrifice it to get your own benefits. There's a lot going on there that I think is very, very fun and hilarious sometimes. But just on its face value, even being able to sacrifice tokens that are going to die anyways, or sacrifice blockers before damage goes through. There's a lot of fun things that just make sure you're getting a ton of value from creatures dying. And you don't even have to be in black to do it either.
I think that's actually a really important moment to hit on for that card there, Matt, because I look at sacrifice outlets and I'm like, if they cost mana to do it versus all the other ones that are free, that feels like a pretty big hang up for me. But this isn't being used necessarily. It doesn't have to be used in those same types of decks that benefit from a bunch of free sacrifice, like an aristocrat strategy. You can just go from a couple big tokens to a couple big creatures. And this is a card that simply allows you to continue to apply pressure to your opponents. Like, you think you're killing my stuff? Well, no, I've just got new stuff, actually. And that's a different genre of deck that benefits really hardcore from something like this. If you have it, I am also a little bit like, Okay, what do I do? How am I going to navigate this? Because his onslaught's not stopping anytime soon, and it's all because of that little thing, which I probably underrated a moment ago, but I need to take it seriously now.
Yeah, the fact that it's in green, it's like just such a nice little niche thing that nothing else quite does what it does in those colors. It's just a really solid value card that was back in the day. I remember when it was spoiled, I was like, oh, that's much better, I think, than maybe people realize. And it's just flown under the radar ever since then as being just a solid value contributor that hasn't quite been displaced.
I think Greater Good gets pretty close, but this one helps more on the token side, maybe.
And I remember what happened too was when this card was previewed, everybody said, well, it's just a worse version of Survival of the Fittest, which that's one of the most powerful cards just in the history of Magic anyways. So Evolutionary Leap being a kind of fixed version of that, I think this is a perfectly great middle ground where like you still want to be playing this card.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in Selesnya, if you're in Gruul, any of those types of colors where this is a great way to make sure that you just have card advantage at any stage of the game.
Yeah, it seems like it was overrated when it first arrived and then immediately became underrated. And then it's been building up ever since. And that's a good trajectory for a card like this. And Matt, I can see why you still appreciate it. You've mentioned a 2-mana enchantment. I'll take another moment to mention a 2-mana enchantment here. And Dana, it's one that we've talked about on past shows before, but I got to sing its praises one more time. It's Teferi's Veil. Teferi's Veil has definitely aged very gracefully. A 2-mana blue enchantment. Whenever any creature you control attacks, it phases out at end of combat. Teferi's Veil was first printed in Weatherlight back in 1997. I don't think it's seen a reprint. It's in nearly 6,200 decks right now. What a, like, the return of phasing, people seeing how good phasing has actually turned out to be in Commander has given this card a whole new life. Even just in the generic sense of like, all right, I'm attacking you, and then after combat, my creatures will disappear, so you can't wrath my board. That's already really, really fantastic. But the fact that this also lets you get around stuff like the unearth effects or anything that would be sacrificed at the end. No, it's phased. It's phased. It doesn't exist. So you get around some effects like that. Tons of brilliant little applications that this card has unlocked in those ways too. But even if it's just protecting your board, I've seen it get used to great effect. I've myself used it to great effect. So Dana, this one's for you. Teferi's Veil. What a fantastic piece of work.
I have loved that card for years and continue to do so. And I guess since we're on the 2-mana enchantment train, you know, this is an effect we've gotten versions of since then. But despite that, Lignify is still a really good piece of removal in green. 1 in a green for an aura, a Treefolk aura specifically. Enchanted creature is a 0/4 Treefolk with no abilities. So for 2 mana, you remove all the abilities from whatever scary creature is out there. You make it a 0/4. And the 0/4 is actually kind of useful because it makes it more difficult to just get killed as a blocker. So particularly if you like are hitting someone's commander with this, yeah, they can block something giant, but like they can't as easily make a deal with someone to do a trade to, you know, get their commander killed and then be able to recast it.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of this kind of effect in general. We've got a bunch of cards that do it, but despite that, Lignify is still really, really solid.
I mean, Darksteel Mutation is my favorite version of this. Giving them an indestructible blocker means that they can't just like chump block and have it die immediately. There's a lot of value to that. Keno's Transformation also is really good. I feel like a lot of those cards you never really see outside of Enchantress decks anyways, because people think, well, if I'm not drawing a card off of it, I can't get rid of it for real. But sometimes you don't need to get rid of it for the rest of the game. You just need to get rid of it for a turn or two.
Well, and sometimes you want it gotten rid of without the ability to
recast it,
be brought back as easily too.
Bring it back, yeah.
Yeah, the powerhouse versions of commanders that we've been seeing, they keep on making more and more egregiously powerful commanders as time goes on. These cards have increased in how good, in my evaluations at least. I think they've gotten better and better as the commanders have gotten better and better. And Dana, I especially love this pick. You'll love this. I mentioned I was building Winter Cynical Opportunist. I was upgrading that precon. One of the very first things that I got back from the graveyard with Winter Cynical Opportunist Delirium Effect was Lignify, because it counts as 2 card types. Kindred technically is a card type, despite all the weirdness of that being it not being a super type. It's a card type. It's like all types of weird business, but it technically counts, so that hit 2 types. And what a great way to just like lock down someone's commander over there. As, like reanimating a Lignify. Come on, that commander's really annoying. That's really cool.
Well, a couple that I'll kind of wrap my thoughts up on too is a couple red cards that they've just been around for so long, and one especially kind of was a gold standard of effects that we talked about a lot too. The other just is fun and makes me laugh. But Outpost Siege, that card just was so good. It was kind of the best card. It was the Red Phyrexian Arena for a long time. I actually won a game a couple weeks ago because I chose the dragon side. So I just got to ping everybody when they cast a board wipe. That was absolutely fantastic. And if we want to talk about killing people and killing them quickly, Avatar of Slaughter actually is just Avatar of Laughter. It's such a big, dumb card, but if you want games to end quickly, this is just the best way to do that. And you're encouraging it. It's not goading, so it's not forcing people to, but you're also making sure that you're just moving things forward.
Yeah, it's even rarer for a creature to have remained good over all of these years. They were much weaker back in the day than they are now. And yeah, seeing something like Avatar still be a viable card today always feels really good.
If we're talking about red cards, I'll audible one in here real quick. Vicious Shadows, which is from 2008 in Shards of Lara, I think. 7-mana enchant. Whenever a creature dies, you may have Vicious Shadows deal damage to target player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. It doesn't have to be their creature. Right. You can sacrifice your own tokens and they will take damage. If they've got 4 cards in hand, cool, 4 damage. Like this scales really well to multiplayer environments. And yeah, some of these cards that I think when I first saw them, I was like, yeah, I don't know. But then you see a Vicious Shadows in play and you're like, oh no. Or Matt, your Avatar Slaughter, you see that and you're just like, yeah, I don't know. And then you move to your combat and you're like, oh wait.
Yeah, absolutely. like you don't have to, cast it and then let it sit for a turn cycle. And you can use it too as just kind of an overrun effect. You can just cast it and just let all your creatures have double strike.
Yes.
Of all the things for you to sneak attack into play, this is one I have some worries about as the game progresses.
I have used that to sneak attack in and make sure that all of my opponents' creatures had double strike when they were attacking somebody else, and I turned it into like a devastating attack and made it lethal, and it was so much fun to watch.
Awesome.
Well, my final Helen Mirren card here is from back in Urza's Saga in 1998. Vernal Bloom is in about 7,000 decks, so not a bad number. 3 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever a forest is tapped for mana, it produces an additional green. There's been a lot of things over the years that let green get extra mana out of the lands that get tapped, but Vernal Bloom's probably the cheapest way to do that, and it's on an enchantment, so it's difficult to remove. Yes, it affects your opponents, so you probably only want to be using this in a mono green deck, but in a mono green deck, I've seen it a couple different times. I've played it in a couple different mono green lists. It still holds up. It still works really well because it tends to so disproportionately impact you. Just a really good card that still remains a really good card here 20 plus years later.
The advent of Yavimaya that lets everything become a forest, I'll admit, immediately had me like, ooh, I don't know, I'd be a little worried.
Makes it a little scary.
But I think the lesson to apply here is the same thing that Matt was just mentioning with Avatar of Slaughter, or like we've mentioned with Coat of Arms.
Yes.
This doesn't need to be the kind of thing that you play and let linger around. The amount of mana that this can produce for you in a late game moment is so exponential that you're probably about to take the game when you cast this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a card you may have to be a little bit judicious about when you use it, but as long as you are, can be very, very impactful, and that's always cool to see for a card that's that old.
Yeah, it ends up being the star of the show. It steals the scene, it steals the entire show, and that's what we want from these classic cards. They put in a really fantastic powerhouse performance. Guys, it's been really fun talking about these these cards that do such fantastic, terrific things. And it's been weird over the course of this episode, imagining these cards in place of the actors that we've named. It's going to be weird to watch movies from now on. I'll just be imagining them all as Magic cards, all the actors on screen. Oh, this card is an Aisha Tyler. This card is a yes.
I mean, it is kind of fun to imagine Illusionist Gambit as Ant-Man, because Paul Rudd definitely has aged quite gracefully. It's silly how handsome he is.
All right. And any other last minute thoughts that we've got before we wrap up here? Any other final things that you want to show appreciation for these cards that have put in such amazing work over the years, do you think?
I mean, just to say that like there's just so many good Magic cards out there that aren't necessarily the really easy to play staples, and it makes for a good experience sometimes to dig a little bit deeper and run a few of these cards in your decks that are still really good performers, but also maybe make for an interesting experience for the folks you're playing against because they maybe haven't seen them or don't see them that often.
Yeah, not every card needs to be Glenn Powell, needs to be the new hot thing on the market. Sometimes you can pay respect to your elders, as you will, and the cards that have shown a lot of staying power. And that's, I think that's where a lot of the fun comes from, Commanders. You can find all these old cards from back when the format was kind of fledgling, as it were, and really explore what could be, and kind of jump in a time capsule a little bit too, and enjoy those cards and just see how they impact today's game.
Yeah, so terrific. Well said, Matt. I love that. Not to get too distracted with the new hotness and pay respects to the old stuff. That is a perfect lesson to end this show on. So with that, let's indeed call the episode to a close. And if folks want to get in touch with us, maybe let us know about their favorite Helen Mirren cards, where is it that they can find us online? Matt?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are proud members of Team Ultimate Guard. So if you catch us at MagicCon Vegas, you can be sure we're going to be protecting all of our cards with Boulder deck boxes with the katana sleeves, making sure that we trust the protection of our cards to the best out there.
And Dana.
You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDHREC and Commander's Herald. And you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me everywhere online at Joseph M. Schultz. And you can find the cast everywhere online at EDHRECast. And if you've got a question for us, you can contact us at edhrecast@gmail.com. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.